I just, in my head, instantly think of Kate Moss and the stairs, and I swung at him. In all of my relationship to date with Johnny, I hadn't landed a blow.
Okay, so the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial is now in a recess after hitting the midpoint of Amber's testimony last week. I know lots of you have been asking for update videos, but I really wanted to treat this subject as carefully as I can, as this is a very sensitive subject that has a lot of ramifications for abuse victims due to it being in the public eye. If I get an Easter egg wrong on a Marvel video, then people will have a go in the comments, but with this, if I put a foot wrong, it's way, way worse. I've had tons of comments from people saying they're unsubscribing for me just even covering it, but this is countered by the amount of people that have asked me to go over it. The thing with YouTube is that no matter what you do, people are gonna complain, and even a video like my Squid Game breakdown had 3,000 people unsubscribe from the channel because of it. So just being as respectful and objective as possible in this video, and throughout it we're going to be going over the updates since we dropped our last one. Instead of discussing Amber's testimony per se, I'm going to be doing what we did with Johnny and discussing the reaction to it from lawyers, behaviour experts, and people who have far more insight on the topic than I do. I'll also be covering the ones we missed, such as Travis McGivern, a Hollywood executive, as well as Amber's personal psychologist, before moving on to her testimony. Now, last week opened with a big move by Amber after she fired her entire PR team due to a string of bad headlines. Public opinion on the trial definitely seems to be in Johnny's favour, and since acquiring the new team, there's been clear attempts by them to try and shift the narrative. Several newspapers have posted her statements in the testimony as truth rather than allegations, and there's also been several times throughout the last 2 weeks where hashtag #IStandWithAmberHeard has trended online. I'm sure most of you watching this know Depp lost a libel case with The Sun, and interestingly, this case might have shown that the newspaper did indeed make stuff up. In her testimony, Heard ended up bringing forth pictures of the bruises she claimed she sustained from Depp's abuse. Placing these side by side with The Sun's front page, you can see that they in fact photoshopped them, adding to the idea that the media definitely jumped to Heard's side in order to enforce this notion. Now, Travis McGivern, who worked as Johnny Depp's security guard, did a 2-hour testimony talking about their relationship and what he witnessed.
What do you recall Ms. Heard saying in those instances?
Deadbeat dad, washed up, you name it. Miss Heard didn't like my involvement in the situation.
And what did she say to you in that instance?
A lot. One-sided conversation. But she basically demeaned my career choice, called me a yes man. Yeah, she definitely threw some shade on me and my chosen career.
What, if any, injuries did you observe on Ms. Heard that day?
I didn't notice any injuries.
And what, if any, injuries did you observe on Mr. Depp when he returned from Australia?
So Mr. Depp had his hand heavily wrapped. He requested I meet him at Penthouse 5, requested that I bring the nurse. And at some point I witnessed Miss Heard throw a Red Bull can. They were both on the middle level. And I saw Miss Heard throw a Red Bull can from her position that struck Mr. Depp in the back.
Anything else that you recall?
At that point, I moved closer to Mr. Depp. I didn't want my client getting hit with anything else. At one point, Miss Heard threw something else, either a purse or some sort of bag or something that she had up there. I was able to knock it away so it didn't hit him. At one point, she spit at him. I felt it was time to get Mr. Depp out of the situation, so I stepped in between Miss Heard and Mr. Depp, telling Mr. Depp that we were leaving and that it wasn't up to him anymore. At that point, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a fist and an arm come across my right shoulder, and I heard and saw a closed fist contact Mr. Depp in the left side of his face.
And whose fist was that?
That was Miss Heard's fist, Amber Heard's fist.
Depp respond when he was punched?
The initial look on his face kind of mirrored mine, kind of a look of shock, like what just happened, where'd that come from? At that point, I wasn't going to let Mr. Depp get hit anymore, so I moved him down the last flight of stairs and told him we're leaving. It wasn't up to him anymore, just for his safety. Again, I had let him get hit by a Red Bull can. I let him get punched. My job is to ensure the safety and well-being of my clients. Felt like I hadn't done that, so Mr. Depp got right in my face. He was wearing sunglasses, and maybe not sunglasses. He was wearing glasses. Pulled him down, pointed to the left side of his face, and told me, "That's your fault."
What did you see on the left side of Mr. Depp's face?
There was already a nice little shiner. Definitely swollen and red. Wasn't black and blue yet, but it was definitely swollen and red.
At any point during this incident, did Mr. Depp throw anything at Ms. Heard?
No.
At any point, did Mr. Depp throw anything at anyone?
No.
At any time during this incident, did Mr. Depp physically respond to Ms. Heard?
No.
What, if any, injuries did you observe on Ms. Heard that evening?
I didn't notice any injuries.
In your time working for Mr. Depp, have you ever seen Mr. Depp physically abuse Ms. Heard?
I have not. The only time I would say I've seen Mr. Depp drunk was when he would fall asleep on the couch, sitting up with his boots on. Other than that, Mr. Depp handles his liquor very well.
So pretty damning, and we also had a personal nurse to Amber who discussed Amber at length as well as the allegations made by her.
On that occasion, you observed that she had a bloody lip, correct?
Correct.
And she told you that that was a result of the altercation with Mr. Depp, right?
Right.
Do you recall Ms. Heard ever telling you that she thought Mr. Depp was cheating on her?
No, I don't recall that specifically. I just, as I've said, have a general sense of remembering jealousy being an issue.
In the testimony, she talked about being sent the photographs of Amber's injuries and also the bruised lip which she examined. The nurse said that she referred Amber to be checked out by a professional physician, but that she was often ignored. She also brought up her drug abuse, and I'm not entirely sure she benefited either side. She did seem to confirm elements of both stories and also discussed Amber's bipolar disorder, which is something that was brought up by Dr. Curry, who we'll talk more about in just a bit. Now, as much as this trial has devolved into an abuse one, the focus seems to have shifted from the defamation side of it, which is what the lawsuit is actually over. It's very easy to get caught up in the more headline-grabbing things, but at the core of it is this idea that because of Heard's piece, that Johnny Depp lost a lot of roles in Hollywood. This was discussed by Richard Marks, a Hollywood executive who went over the ins and outs of Depp's perception in the industry.
The Me Too movement?
Well, I would say the bigger the company, the bigger the budgets, they're all sensitive. But at the pinnacle of sensitivity are the family-friendly companies like Disney. They're particularly sensitive, not in a general way, but in a very specific way.
Mr. Marks, are you familiar with the op-ed Ms. Heard published in the Washington Post on December 18th, 2018?
Yes.
What's your understanding of how that op-ed was received in Hollywood?
My understanding of how that op-ed was received in Hollywood.
I'm sorry, sir. Yes. Is this his personal understanding, his expert understanding? It seems like if it's his personal understanding, it's not relevant.
I'm asking Mr. Marks based on his nearly 50 years in the entertainment industry.
Overrule the objection. Thank you, Your Honor.
As I've said before, I am a member of the Hollywood community. That op-ed, for the first time, is in a mainstream publication called the Washington Post. This is a flagship journal, if you will, of American news. We're not talking about a trade paper. We're not talking about a rag. We're talking about the Washington Post. And it is geared to Hollywood. It says, 2 years ago, when I was getting my divorce, Amber Heard is saying, I was the abuser, and you didn't, Hollywood, you stood up for my abuser, not for
objection,
me,
Your
the
Honor.
victim.
Objection. Now he's mischaracterizing the document.
I think he's expressing his understanding of how that was perceived.
I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Thank you.
What I'm saying is Hollywood got the subject matter of the op-ed loud and clear. Amber Heard was calling out Hollywood for supporting since 2016, supporting her abuser, and she felt the wrath of Hollywood. She was calling them out to do something. In the Washington Post, and on the eve of her biggest film, a big film for Hollywood, the publicity machine was in high gear. There was lots of publicity and news out there. This was the height of her fame, and she used it at that moment to call Hollywood out. They, in my opinion, as a member of Hollywood, they heard that plea loud and clear, and it also got her publicity for her movie. I don't think in my perception, and people in Hollywood didn't see that as a coincidence, that date. So yeah, in Hollywood, I think the message was received that she was sending.
This was a really interesting statement that went through Hollywood's reaction to the Me Too movement. Marks later went on to say that in his belief, Hollywood had a complete no-tolerance policy to any accusations of abuse at the time, and that several actors were let go because the Me Too movement was so strong that they simply didn't want to deal with the optics of working with abusers. There was also discussion of Johnny's reputation before the op-ed, which Heard's team tried to use to show that it might not have been that caused his career's downfall. I've discussed in other videos their strategy and how they're not only trying to deflect, but also show that Depp did these things, which is a route that they took here. Personally, I think this attack failed, as Marks basically broke down the way that Hollywood dealt with actors, but I'll let you make up your own mind with this new clip.
Now, you would agree that there was negative publicity about Mr. Depp being publicly drunk before the op-ed, correct?
There was, I agree with the proposition that there was negative publicity before the op-ed. The op-ed was something different.
And you agree, in 2014, there was an article in The Guardian that said apparently drunk Johnny Depp cut off at Hollywood Film Awards ceremony. Would you agree with that?
Again, I don't remember reading The Guardian, and I don't remember that particular incident, but I'll take you at your word.
And you remember, in looking through all the documents, that you saw an article that Johnny Depp allegedly showed up drunk to movie premiere, reports say, right? That was in 2017.
I think I've testified that there is certainly Johnny Depp behavior and negativity out there. Yes.
And that a family production studio like Disney wouldn't want to be associated with, correct?
Again, you're talking about a very specific, series of 5 films that earn billions of dollars, and there is a line in Hollywood, as I've said, they'll put up with divas and drugs to make money, but now we've drawn a line in Hollywood at the domestic and sexual abuse.
And in looking through the documents, you saw articles in June of 2018 that said vodka for breakfast, 72-hour drug binges, and spending sprees that beggar belief. You saw that?
Again, I know these articles exist. I know they're not in the Washington Post. I don't know what article you're referring to, who wrote it, what publication it was in, but I know that those articles exist.
And you'd agree that before the op-ed, Mr. Depp had a run of movie flops, wouldn't you agree?
Every actor has, ups and downs. Mr. Depp, his career's been decades long.
You would agree that in January of 2015, there was an article that said Johnny Depp is on his way to becoming the most overpaid actor in Hollywood.
Again, you'd have to show me the article, but I don't doubt that some commentator trying to trade on being a smarty pants wrote that.
And you'd agree that there was another article in 2015 that says, quote, has Johnny Depp become Hollywood's biggest joke?
I don't know. Netflix has a whole festival going now. Netflix is a joke.
And you'd agree that there is an article in Business Insider from 2015 that says Johnny Depp has his 5th box office bomb in a row.
If that's what it said, it said. Are you just going to keep reading this?
Well, I mean, this is Mr. Depp's reputation. That's what you're talking about in terms of Hollywood, correct? And in 2016, December of 2016, there's an article that says, quote, Johnny Depp is Hollywood's most overpaid actor for the 2nd year in a row. Did you recall reading that?
I don't know, was that written by the second underpaid actor? Or
and you would agree that before the op-ed, there was negative publicity for Mr. Depp about assassinating President Trump. Would you agree?
No, I missed that one.
You didn't see an article in the New York Times that said Johnny Depp flirts with idea of Trump assassination, then apologizes?
Again, Johnny Depp talks with irony and panache, and I don't particularly remember that. I have a lot of stuff in front of me.
Disney wouldn't want to be involved with somebody who's calling for the assassination of the president, would it?
I'm sure after those articles, Johnny Depp was involved in major studio projects.
Do you know one way or the other whether Mr. Depp was involved in major studio projects after June 23rd, 2017?
I think, again, I haven't quoted his IMDb page to memory, but he was in an animated film called Sherlock Gnomes. I think it was released, Paramount is one of the producers. I think it was released in 2017. User in those years. There was also the other side of the coin.
But the op-ed that didn't mention Mr. Depp at all and didn't mention any accusations that what happened to her, that's what caused Mr. Depp all his reputational harm? That's what you're saying?
Well, I don't agree that this article was not about
Did it mention Mr. Depp? That's what I asked you.
Well, does she have another husband who abused her
But
in
did it talk
2016?
did it talk at all about Mr. Depp's abuse?
Objection, Your Honor. He's tried to answer the first question, which was not exactly what the second question was that he re-asked. I'd asked that he be permitted to finish.
Ask your question. We'll go for it.
So yeah, Mark said that drugs and alcohol, Depp's career highs and lows, weren't really factors in deciding if he got jobs, and that it was more the no tolerance to abuse that the industry took. We have talked about Heard's team and the way they question witnesses, and yeah, to me, he was very leading here, constantly interrupting Marks when he was delivering actually interesting points, and very much going about it the wrong way in my opinion. Now as things develop further, we hit the point where Amber and her team tried to have the case thrown out of court. Though I thought this was pretty stupid, I actually had a lawyer contact me just after this, saying it's a pretty common strategy that fails 99% of the time, but teams just try it because they can. I doubt that they actually thought the notion would pass, and yeah, it was just kind of them going through the motions, trying to get the case thrown out on the off chance that it would be. Now next we had Dr. Dawn Hughes, a psychologist, who basically said the exact opposite to what Dr. Curry said. She was definitely on the side of Amber, and said that Depp abused her, and she attempted to shut down the idea that she was the one at fault. Gonna play two parts of her, as she was accused of being very biased towards women, and she was challenged on using male pronouns like he and him to describe abusers, whilst using her and she to describe victims. I'll then be following this up with a breakdown by Court TV, went over the differences between both her statement and Dr. Curry's. Huge shout out to Court TV as well for compiling these clips, and definitely go check out their channel as they've got some great stuff on the case.
You testified yesterday that you have to give careful attention to gendered stereotypes.
That is correct.
When you're talking about intimate partner violence, you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes. And during your testimony, you in fact paid attention to gendered stereotypes, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you said we were going to have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes, and then you testified at length where you referenced both men and women. You paid attention to those stereotypes during the course of your testimony, correct?
What I was saying was you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes when you're conducting these evaluations. You can't assume all the time that the male is the perpetrator and the female is the victim. You have to go into the evaluation understanding that the male also could be the victim of intimate partner violence.
In fact, you're aware that there are large-scale studies that do say that IPV towards males does exist.
Of course.
Okay. And every time you referred to the characteristic of a victim of intimate partner violence yesterday, you used the pronouns she or her, didn't you?
I was using the she and her pronouns in this case because my determination was, as I stated, that Ms. Heard was the victim of intimate partner violence. That is why I was using the she, her pronouns.
You, in fact, said women gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. That's what you said. The woman gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. And then you say difficult for victim to extricate herself. You go on to say that she can and she should. Over and over, you use she, right?
I believe in this case I did because I was referencing this case where I found Ms. Heard to be the victim of intimate partner violence. It doesn't mean that men don't get into the relationships for all the right reasons too. I believe they do.
So yeah, she is kind of giving her excuse for why she did it there, and a lot of people are very torn on this. Now, she did throw a lot of shots Curry's way, and Curry will be called back to the stand again to go over what she thinks, and we'll no doubt be touching upon this again, as her last testimony was so interesting.
And what did the evaluation consist of?
So as I stated, the evaluation consisted of psychological testing, a semi-structured clinical interview with Ms. Heard, a review of a whole host of documents relative to this case and medical records and psychological records, and then 3 collateral interviews, 2 with her treating therapist, Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, Dr. Connell Cohen, and also with her mom.
And in the semi-structured clinical interview, what were you assessing?
Well, when someone comes in for the evaluation, you sometimes don't know what you're going to see or what you're going to get. So you absolutely have to do a full clinical interview and have a sense of their life patterns, things that have affected them in their lives, you know, where they have worked, where they have lived, just get a full sense of their sort of being before the incident for which they're talking about. Then I do a full intimate partner violence assessment, looking at all those characteristics that I talked to you about earlier, to get a sense of the full structure of and the dynamic of this relationship. I also did looking at what were the effects, what were the psychological consequences of being in that relationship, and I also looked at the psychological consequences of some of the statements that were made by Mr. Depp through his attorney that are part of this, the counterclaim in this lawsuit.
At the end of that process, considering all the data, did you arrive at any expert opinions?
Yes, I did.
All right, I would like to start with your main expert opinions and then go through those. Can you please tell the jury what your main opinions were?
So like I said, there are opinions embedded within them, but the main opinion is that Ms. Heard's report of intimate partner violence and the records that I reviewed is consistent with what we know in the field about intimate partner violence, characterized by physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive control, and surveillance behaviors.
And what was the other main opinion that you had?
The second main opinion was that that Ms. Heard demonstrated very clear psychological and traumatic effects or the exacerbation of trauma from those statements that Mr. Depp made through his attorney. There were 3 statements that we evaluated to see how they affected her emotionally and psychologically, and it was my determination that they did.
And did you arrive at any diagnostic conclusions?
Yes, I did.
And what were those?
I diagnosed Ms. Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder.
And what, if any, etiology was associated with the post-traumatic stress disorder?
So the etiology is the cause. In order to have to meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to have an actual cause. It's one of the few diagnostic entities that we have to have a cause for. And the cause was the intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp. That was what was pushing the symptoms. That was what's related to the intrusive phenomena. That was related to her avoidance. That was related to her differences in her mood, that was related to her avoidance efforts. So it was the cause was the intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp.
All right, now earlier in the trial, Dr. Shannon Curry, who you'll see her there, she was actually spotted in the gallery today, listening to Dr. Hughes' testimony. She diagnosed Amber Heard with 2 personality disorders.
As a result of the work that you performed, did you form any opinions with respect to Ms. Heard?
I did.
What were those opinions?
The results of Ms. Heard's evaluation supported 2 diagnoses, borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder.
Now, Dr. Curry also addressed whether Heard suffers from PTSD.
There are 20 kind of core symptoms that somebody can manifest with PTSD. You don't have to have all of them. Ms. Heard initially said that she had, in the first question, you say, do you ever have this, before you get to the more nuanced follow-up questions. When I asked that first question on each item, she initially said, yes, I have that, to 19 of the 20 symptoms. That's not typical even of somebody with the most disabling form of PTSD. When we eventually sort of dialed it down, she had 3 remaining symptoms. And having symptoms of any disorder is common for all of us. Some of us struggle with sleep. Some of us get anxious. It could be several different disorders. It could just be that you have this struggle in your life. But she had 3 specific symptoms that I scored as present. Off the top of my head, I might miss one, but one was sleep disturbance. So she reported that she has frequent nightmares. Another one was that she said that she tends to have a startle response. So if she gets startled or surprised, she tends to stay in sort of a hyper startle mode for quite a while. And that's consistent with a couple of things. It can be consistent with PTSD if other criteria are met. It's also consistent with childhood complex trauma, which is something that can occur when your brain is forming. If you constantly feel unsafe, if your parents are abusive, or if they're not present, if you're neglected, you can develop certain physiological responses that can stay for a long time in your life. So I noted that seemed like a very genuine, accurate account where she stays in the state of kind of hyper arousal, has a hard time calming down if she gets surprised.
You mentioned nightmares as well.
Yes.
Did she recount for you the nature of the nightmares?
So they were vague. She indicated that she has recurrent nightmares and that she feels as though she's being held down. And there was some conflict in that account because even though that could be a PTSD symptom, it is fairly vague, but I still scored it as present. And in her initial treatment with with Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, which I believe started before she began dating Mr. Depp, she had indicated to Dr. Jacobs, according to Dr. Jacobs's notes, that she was having repetitive nightmares back then and that they were related to her childhood trauma. And so that came up several times in the notes. Dr. Jacobs kept mentioning that.
Thank you. What is feigning?
Feigning is essentially faking or exaggerating symptoms that aren't present.
Does the CAPS-5 control for that?
It doesn't necessarily control for it. It can expose it by drawing out
How does that work?
Because you're not just simply handing the person a checklist that says, here are all the symptoms of PTSD. Why don't just check off the ones you have, which clearly if you're trying to look like you have PTSD, you would just check them all. The CAPS-5, because it requires them to describe in detail how they experience the symptom, where it shows up, what it looks like, what sort of examples they can give you, how many times it's happened in the last couple of weeks, how many times it's happened in the last month. By the end of each symptom, you've gotten a very good picture of a couple things. One, does it meet the definition of the symptom? Are they getting it right? Is this actually the symptom, or are they kind of confusing this with something else? Number 2, are they giving you very vague accounts? Are they giving you kind of a stereotyped idea of what the symptom is based on media or movies or something that actually is completely different from genuine experiences of this symptom? Or are they giving you a very genuine, heartfelt, sometimes minimizing, but it's ticking all the boxes, their mannerisms while they're describing it, the actual very specific, very nuanced, symbolic ways they're describing it. A lot of times it smells, it sounds, that all appears in genuine accounts, and it's something that people really get wrong when they're feigning.
All right, still with me, former homicide prosecutor Melba Pearson. And Melba, gosh, they both sound so credible, quite frankly. I'm listening to both. They both make sense. I know you've had many, many cases where you have a battle of the experts. What are you looking for? Or how do you separate your expert from the other expert?
So one of the things that I always liked to do when I was trying cases was to make sure that my expert is really giving context to some of the evidence that's coming out in the trial and really referring back to different things that the jury hears. I tend to like to call my experts a little bit later in the trial, not necessarily leading with them, because I like to get a little bit of evidence in first and then have the expert kind of explain that context to the jury so that they're like, oh, connect the dots. Okay, I understand what this expert is saying and how this fits into the broader case. I think in this instance, I'm not saying that it was wrong for the defense to necessarily start with the expert, because again, we heard so much coming out of the plaintiff's case. But again, I think the goal here is to try to really lay the foundation for Amber Heard's testimony and for the powerful stories that she's going to end up sharing, because no matter which way you cut it, if she has to get into the personal details of what happened to her, and there's no way that she can get away from around doing that, it's going to be painful. It's going to be stressful for the jurors, as well as for Amber Heard, talking about traumatic experiences that may have happened to her and the effects that it's had on her to this day.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the order of the witnesses, because initially the scuttlebutt was that Amber Heard would be the first witness. And then I think there was a change in strategy there. They decided to put the doctor on. I think it was a nod to the fact that this other expert had done a pretty good job on the stand. So ultimately, now that you've heard her direct examination, again, we still have to go through cross, do you think it was the right move to put her on before Amber Heard?
I think so. At this juncture, I think so. Of course, I'm going to want to see the rest of the witnesses and the evidence that comes out, and then I can opine better after seeing everyone. Okay, so-and-so should have been first versus this person. But I think at this juncture, having the doctor testify is a good way to rebut some of what the plaintiff's expert said. So I think in some ways that puts a little bit of distance and kind of signals to the jury, okay, wait a minute, there was more to hear here, there's more to see. Don't just, go with what this doctor's saying, listen to what our doctor's saying. And now you're going to hear from Amber Heard and hear her direct testimony and her pain.
Now that kind of takes us to Amber's, which is why I've held off immediately reporting on this, as she made some very serious allegations in it. If you've been keeping up with the discourse around it, then you'll know there's very much a split down the middle over people's opinions, with there being a side that believes her and people that don't think she's telling the truth. Heard's testimony was a complete opposite to Depp's, where he was focused on answering the lawyer's questions, whereas she played things to the jury. Now the reason I brought up Dr. Curry before this point is because she actually predicted that this is what Amber would do. One of the most interesting aspects I found was that they said people will often embellish on minor details when lying, so that their story sounds more believable. They'll bring up pointless things like a wallpaper pattern, which they'll go into detail about, and in the testimony, Amber brought up things like the carpet that she kept staring at, which she described in great detail. I'm definitely going to go back and watch Johnny's testimonies with this in mind, and I also think it's important to bring up the fake news surrounding what she said. You might have noticed there's been a talented Mr. Ripley quote, which has been said to have been taken verbatim and used to describe Johnny, but I'll look through all the statements and couldn't find anywhere that this was actually said out loud. I think everyone is kind of just running the danger right now of doing confirmation bias, and I'm even at a point myself where I have to double check a lot of what I'm doing and what clips I'm using in case they pen out a certain narrative. I know it probably does come through in these videos what side I'm on, but I am really trying to view this objectively, and yet just be as careful as you can, as it's easy to fall into the trap with this stuff, and again, it's a really serious subject, so approach it please with some sensitivity. Now, Court TV brought in two experts who analysed her testimony, and here's what they said.
Well, one of the things that I did, Michael, to really understand who she is, not only as an actress, but also as a person. So I went back and analyzed video going back to her early career. So when she was on different television shows and she took interviews, I'm trying to watch, her different times of emoting. What does she look like when she's just in a normal conversation? Then I'm comparing it to now. Now she's in the spotlight. She's right here in court, and she's telling this story about her abusive relationship. So when I'm watching her body language, I'm looking to see if her words are sinking, whether facial expression doesn't match. So overall, what I'm seeing with her is this animated, overarching, overly expressive expressions. The other thing that I'm noticing Where's the tears? So I see her crying and getting herself all histrionic, but where is the tears? The tears are not flowing. She has these very rapid movements. She's jumping up and down in her chair. She's moving around. And those would all be indicative of somebody that's feeling uncomfortable. But I've looked at a lot of video, and I'm going to speak to your other guests too. In all of my years as a trial consultant, and I've worked on a lot of high-profile cases and watched them, I have never seen this type of demeanor and theatrics ever in any case I have ever worked on. This is the worst performance of Amber Heard in her career.
All right, Krista, I've got to let you respond to that. You seem to think she was doing fairly well. Susan differs.
Well, and I see where she's saying. I did notice that I was like, I can't really see if there's tears. I questioned that yesterday when I was watching. To this point, though, one of the problems that I've had with both Amber Heard and Johnny Depp's testimony is the level of detail. I've represented a lot of trauma victims, and as a trial lawyer, we want to tell a story in a way that has beginning, middle, and end, and it's easy for the jury to digest. Here, with a trauma victim, you would expect to have much more fragmented memories and missing pieces. And you don't have that here. You have a lot of detail. And so that, to me, is a little suspicious when a story is being told. But memories can be brought out through therapy, through lawyers questioning with evidence, and maybe putting together pieces for her. But to that point, I think that is problematic.
Yeah, fair enough. And Susan, I want to Krista's point about the therapy. Could it be, in Amber's defense, she's gone through a lot of therapy. These things happened 6, 7, 8 years ago, different times, but all the way back to 2013. She's talked about it in court. She's talked about it with therapists. She's talked about it with her lawyers. Could it just be that some of that emotion is not there in the same way, and that's why the tears aren't flowing?
Well, I think that she's trying to relive this again. She's trying to match the evidence with the emotion. She's trying to hypen it up. So to your point is that, yes, when a person has gone through trauma and they go through therapy, and it certainly will help them to kind of float through these very high stressful times when they have to express what happened. But here's there's just so much I'd like to share with you. If she had gone through all of this therapy, and if she had PTSD, did she go through EMDR therapy? If she went through EMDR therapy and somebody were asking her questions that would create a feeder memory, taking her back into the subconscious mind, bringing it forward like replaying a tape again, she would more easily be able to flow through those, because what she's learned to do is to nullify some of those triggers. So who's triggering her? There's no one here triggering her. She's being asked a question, and then she's going on into her own dialogue, and she continually escalates these particular events. Does not make sense to me at all.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it does. I don't know if it necessarily means she's lying, but I certainly think you're right. I think she's trying to trigger these feelings herself.
So yeah, very, very interesting analysis of it that talks about the performative aspects of the testimony. Now, like they said, this could have been developed through therapy, or it could indeed be an act. I really feel for the jury in this case, as it's definitely something I think people will be torn on, and though I tend to look at the evidence rather than the testimonies, these will no doubt have an effect on them. We of course have the recordings in which Amber admitted to hitting him, and the witnesses, which are what I personally lean towards, but Heard's team haven't fully presented all their side yet, and yeah, it could end up becoming very messy. Now, Amber did drop something that means Depp's team will have a lot of ammunition going forward, and she brought up Kate Moss during her statement about the time she hit Depp. For some context, this called back to the incident before with the security guard, and in it she alleged that she only hit Johnny because he swung for her sister. This is something that Travis didn't mention at all, and Amber then referenced his previous relationship with Kate Moss. Pay close attention to Depp's team when she brings her up, as their reaction shows they've now got a new opening in which to travel.
Johnny swings at her, and I just see my little sister with her back to the staircase, and Johnny swings at her, and I don't even wait for any other, I don't hesitate, I don't wait, I just in my head instantly think of Kate Moss and the stairs, and I swung at him. In all of my relationship to date with Johnny, I hadn't landed a blow.
Now why this is important is because up until now, Depp's team haven't been able to bring up his previous relationships. Though people like Winona Ryder have come forward in defense of Depp and said that he never showed any abusive tendencies towards them, these haven't been admitted to the court. There's a concept in US law in which the prosecution often cannot bring up certain things unless the defendant brings them up themselves in either a testimony or cross-examination. Kate Moss was originally declared as being someone that could not be used as a witness to the trial by the judge. She stated that she didn't really pertain to this case itself and that she was an irrelevant party even though she would have likely worked in Depp's defense. However, Heard bringing her up and implying that Depp was abusive towards her means that she's now relevant and can be called upon if Depp's team wish to do it. The idea of past relationships being brought into it also means that they can bring up Heard's previous ones as well. So it opens the floodgates up massively in Depp's favour and means that there's a high chance that he can bring in way more evidence. We of course are now working with a week-long recess, so the teams will likely either be scrambling to get this included or to have it thrown out. It's a major turning point in the case, and we'll of course be back when there are further developments. I hope you enjoyed the video, and again, yeah, some sensitive stuff here that I'm trying to cover without turning this into a drama channel. I appreciate all your comments trying to guide me through this thing. I'm not going to get it right 100% of the time, so yeah, just anything, any feedback you can give, it is massively appreciated, and it does affect the future videos, hopefully for the better. Now, if you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our other videos on the subject, which will be linked below. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care. Peace.